Well, welcome everybody. I'll just get started here and then we'll hand the meeting over to Michael and Sarah. I think Sarah is probably on her way to being in a second. So welcome everybody to the meeting of the two Turlock Subbasin technical advisory committees for the two GSAs. And just have a reminder here up on the screen that we will be having comment for public comment and also on the specific agenda items. We can do that a number of different ways. Usually it's pretty easy given the number of people that attend this meeting. It doesn't get too unwieldy. We could use the chat function, raise hand feature, all those things that we're used to by now on Zoom. We are recording the meeting so that we can have it posted online on our YouTube page after. And also there's a couple meeting materials that are available for this meeting that are available on our website, a couple presentations. So you'll be able to reference them there as well. I think that with that being said, I'm looking to see if I stalled enough time to see if Sarah Wolf has made her way on the line or if she's going to have a representative in her stead. But other than that, I guess, Michael, I'll lend to you.
Okay, thank you, Herb. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the joint meeting of the West Turlock and East Turlock Groundwater Sustainability Agency Technical Advisory Committees, and it's co-chaired by me from the West Turlock Subbasin GSA and Sarah Wolf, my counterpart on the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. The first item on our agenda is the call to order, which is getting a quorum of both the West and East Turlock Technical Advisory Committees. Right now for the West Turlock, I think we're struggling a little bit. I see 5, but for a correction, I've got TID representation was 1, Orlando from the city of Turlock, Miguel from the city of Modesto, David Odom from Denair, Leandro from Delhi. Have I missed anybody from West Turlock GSA? Adriel, you're on? So we got
yes.
Wonderful. So that's 6.
I just got on here if you're looking, Michael.
Curtis, is that you?
That's me.
Never been so happy to see you. Okay, so with that, the West Turlock Subbasin Technical Advisory Committee has a quorum, and I call our meeting to order at 2:03 p.m. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Michael. Let's see here. I'm just scrolling through as well. I see we have Matt Beeman on from Merced. Christy is on from Stanislaus, and Adriel is on from Merced County, and Dennis Yatsua is on from Belico Cortez, and myself. So we also have a quorum, and I call the meeting to order at 2:03.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So just call the meeting to order, but I do want to call out one person, our new subbasin contact from the Department of Water Resources. That's Elise Brody. Elise, I hope I got your last name correct. I don't know if you want to say hi, but just welcome to the group, and we're glad to have you on board as our representative at Department of Water Resources.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I can go ahead and introduce myself real quick. So my name is Elise Briotti, and I'm an engineering geologist at the Fresno office of Department of Water Resources. And I recently became the point of contact for the Turlock Subbasin, taking over for Amanda Peich Derby. So basically that means that I'll be attending the GSA meetings whenever I can. And then I can act as a liaison between you all and DWR. So you're welcome to reach out to me with any questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll pass it on to the right person who does. The best way to contact me is probably via email, but phone is good as well. And I'll go ahead and put my contact information in the chat so that everybody has it available to them. And I think that's everything. So thank you for allowing myself to introduce myself today. And I look forward to attending your meetings and learning more about your implementation process. Thanks.
That's great, Elise. And again, thanks for joining us and for being part of this program here. Okay, so moving on to item number 3, public participation. This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the Subbasin Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Technical Advisory Committee. So you can talk about general issues now, or if there's an issue on the agenda, you can hold your comments until that time. So with that, is there any public comment? Okay, hearing none. I don't see any hands, and I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything. So with that, we'll close public participation and move on to item number 4, which is an action item, the approval of the minutes. So go first with the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. So this is the approval of the minutes of the June 23rd, 2022 regular joint meeting of the Joint Technical Advisory Committee. So those minutes have been mailed out, re-mailed out. Is there anybody from the West Turlock who'd like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve, Juritzma.
We have a motion from Hilmar. Do we have a second?
I approve. Orlando City, Turlock.
Orlando seconds. Any further discussion? Any changes? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes stand approved. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Michael. So we need to approve the same minutes, June 23rd meeting for the East Turlock GSA TAC. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
This is Matt. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Matt. And a second?
I could
I'll
second.
second.
I'm going to take Dennis on that one. Thank you. And then we need to do a roll call. So I'll just go through real quickly. Matt,
Aye.
Dennis,
Aye.
Christy,
Aye.
Adriel,
Aye.
and Sarah. Yes, so motion carries.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, item number 5, which is for the West Turlock TAC only. This is a resolution allowing us to continue to recognize the state of emergency proclaimed by the governor and to allow us to continue meeting via teleconference for meetings for the period of August 4th through September 3rd pursuant to the Brown Act. So we've had this come up a number of times before. We have to re-adopt it every 30 days. Do we have a motion to continue to meet via teleconference? It's like we're going back to in person. Let someone.
Make a motion, Michael.
Okay, McGill makes the motion to adopt that resolution. Do we have a second?
I'll second, or Karen can.
Okay, we have a second by Karen Morgan at Series. So this is a resolution, so the clerk can call the roll, correct?
Very good. I will do that for you, Chair Cook.
Go ahead.
Member Alvarez,
Yes.
Member Gutierrez,
Yes.
Member Juritzma,
Yes.
Member Maldonado. Did we lose Leandro? Okay, Member McKinnon,
Yes.
Member Odom,
Yes.
Member Ramirez,
Yes.
Member Velasquez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morgan,
Yes.
and Chair Cook.
Hi.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna mute. If the resolution stands approved, we'll meet on Zoom next month. Okay, moving on to item number 6, budget updates, overview of the revenues and expenditures for both the West and the East Turlock Technical Advisory Committees. Who wants to go first? Michael, you ready for the West?
Sure.
Okay, over to Michael Clipper.
Okay. For the West Turlock account, as of June 30th, we had $161,316.32. We do have a handful of invoices that will are going to be circulated here in the next week to be paid for both the West Turlock and for the Basin account. Moving over to the Basin account, as of June 30th, I'm sorry, as of today, we have $789,822.83, And like I mentioned, there are a few pending invoices that will take that balance down, that will be paid out here in the next week or two. Any questions?
Any questions for Michael? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Over to Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I can give the update for June, for the month of June for East Turlock GSA. So we had a balance at the end of June of $28,176.76. And we had a deposit from the East Side Water District for their 218 for the GSA, and that was for $299,076. And we will be collecting, we just had a hearing today, the 218 for the remaining members of the East Turlock GSA. So those funds will be coming in soon, but we have a balance after we have checks to be approved that were approved today and paid of $13,176.97, leaving us with a balance at July 31 of $314,075.79. And that is where East Turlock's budget stands.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah?
I had one more comment, actually.
Okay, sorry, Michael, back to
Yeah.
you.
Or I just remembered. Just FYI, I will be sending out invoices to the West Turlock folks here in the next few days. So keep an eye open in your email, probably tomorrow morning.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for that, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, that's our budget update. Moving on to item number 7. This is the initiation of groundwater level monitoring for spring 2022, consistent with our groundwater sustainability plan. And we have Phyllis from Tog Groundwater who can go through that with us. So over to you, Phyllis. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to grab the screen from Herb here, and we're going to take a look at some PowerPoints that will help me better get us on track with where we're headed. Okay, can we see my screen?
Looks good.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How nice to see everyone's names again. We haven't been back with you in a while since the annual report. And today I'm going to be talking about the initiation of our monitoring events associated with the Turlock Subbasin GSP. I'm sure you remember we just submitted the Turlock Subbasin GSP in late January. And at that time, we were still in the process of developing our first annual report, as well as doing some of our spring groundwater level monitoring. We've just compiled all of that information, gotten it to DWR as part of the reporting program. And I'm here today to just provide some of the results from the first monitoring event that we've had. So it's for spring 2022, and it is our first monitoring event associated with the GSP program. Our goal for the spring program is really to capture seasonal high groundwater elevations. We measured those elevations in our 48 active representative monitoring wells in the subbasin and reported the data and information to the Department of Water Resources. There is semi-annual reporting required, semi-annual monitoring and reporting required. The spring monitoring, as I mentioned, was for the high groundwater elevations in the subbasin, and the fall measurements are for the capturing of the low groundwater levels in the basin. So that gives us a nice snapshot of the fluctuations that occur seasonally throughout the area. Those data are due to DWR on July 1st and July 1st and January 1st for the spring and fall respectively. And we've uploaded data to the portal on June 15th for our first report in advance of our July 1st deadline. So we're on target for our first 2020 monitoring event. Most of those water levels were measured in March 2022. We try to get monitoring to occur as close as we can to the same time period so that we get a snapshot of groundwater conditions across the subbasin. But there were a few wells, just 4, measured in late January and also in February because of access. Those wells are active production wells, and they began pumping in March due to the drought conditions. We started irrigation a little early in the subbasin. And as a result, we want to capture that high groundwater elevation prior to the initiation of all of the local irrigation that begins. So we incorporated our high level from February for most of those wells in January for one well in the data. There were two representative monitoring wells that were not able to be measured. One is a USGS owned well. It was drilled on private property. We coordinated with USGS to put that into our network, but there's still a few issues with respect to access. We're working with USGS. We had some of the folks that installed that well have now retired, and so it's just taking a little bit longer than we thought, but the GSAs are continuing to gain access to that well. For one of our wells, ETS GSA 12, we actually had a casing collapse in that well, so that well will no longer be available for monitoring. We're looking for a replacement, and we've probably identified one, and I'll mention that as we get to some of the maps. We took the data that we measured from the 2020 monitoring event and updated the hydrographs in order to be able to look at our representative monitoring wells with respect to our sustainable management criteria, in particular with minimum thresholds. So let's just have a little refresher on minimum thresholds, since we might not have thought about those for a while. I've put an example hydrograph here with the ground surface in that black line, and the blue lines are groundwater elevations that have been measured in this well from 1990 through 2022. And so that spring data that we're talking about today is that very last blue dot there on the right portion of the hydrograph. The minimum threshold that we have selected for this well is shown in the orange line and labeled there. And recall that a minimum threshold is essentially a floor. It's the lowest water level that we would want to manage groundwater levels to. So we have also on this hydrograph the green line, which is a measurable objective, and that's sort of on average conditions where we'd like to see our groundwater levels hover and be managed to those levels, and to stay above the minimum thresholds for a variety of reasons that we have talked about in previous meetings for adverse impacts to various components in our groundwater basin. And so the purpose, of course, for monitoring is to see how we're doing with respect to our sustainable management criteria and to be able to document our progress. So for our network that has chronic lowering of water level MTs associated with it, we had water levels that were both above and below the the minimum threshold. We had 16 wells above and 19 wells below. That's about a little more than half of the wells that are already below the minimum threshold. Two were not measured, as I mentioned previously. For the interconnected surface water, we also had about half of our wells below the minimum threshold. We only have 11 wells in that program right now. We're in the process of adding more, and I know we all talked about that in great detail as we put together the GSP monitoring network, that more wells were needed along the river boundaries. But as of right now, we have 5 wells with water levels above the minimum threshold and 6 wells with water levels below the minimum thresholds. So below the minimum thresholds is not ideal, but this is not unexpected. In fact, we knew that this would occur. I mean, if you think about the timing, we just submitted the GSP late January. And so we were at that time continuing to see drought conditions persist in the subbasin. And we knew that we had wells that had declining water level trends. Yet we wanted to set our minimum thresholds high enough to prevent our adverse impacts that we had defined as undesirable results. So there are many wells in the subbasin that we are trying to recover water levels to those levels. And we knew that that would occur. That was happening when we put some of those representative monitoring wells into our network in the first place. We all recognize that projects and management actions are going to take time to stabilize the water levels and allow some portions of the subbasin to recover to MT levels. And in recognition of that, Sigma says that you can acknowledge that you know that these declining levels are occurring in the subbasin, and that you are aware of them, and you are putting together your projects to be able to manage those for the future. But in the short term, Sigma allows you to designate an interim milestone. That's what this IM stands for in this last bullet. And the one that we have selected for many of our wells with declining trends for 2027, you have to do these in 5-year increments. So our first 5-year period is 2027. We have assigned interim milestones for those wells. And just again, as a little refresher, we've looked at this so many times, and I know you will recognize it. This is the Department of Water Resources nice graph that illustrates the concept of interim milestones and suggests that Sigma allows the GSAs to define these interim milestones as a glide path to sustainable management. So you can see the IM number 1 that I'm pointing to there with my arrow. That is representative of the 2027 interim milestone that's set below the MT. Again, in recognition that we're going to take some time for the subbasin to be able to get projects and management actions implemented and then allow the groundwater system to respond to those actions. So again, not unexpected. This is exactly what we had anticipated moving into the spring network. But we do want to look at those interim milestones as well as the MTs. And this is an example on this hydrograph of one of those wells with a declining trend that we have selected an interim milestone for 2027. And it's shown there by the dashed navy line on the hydrograph. And just to give you a summary of the results with respect to the interim milestones, we have 19 wells with interim milestones selected for the chronic lowering of water level network. And only one well appears to be below the IM, and it's actually only 1 foot below. It's one well in the eastern portion of the western upper principal aquifer. Additional wells, however, are within a few feet of the IM. So we would anticipate probably that fall monitoring event would see some water levels below the IMs. Excuse me. For the interconnected surface water, we didn't have any wells that had water levels that had gone below the interim milestones. So we're on target there to begin to glide upward toward our MTs for those wells. Just as a reminder for all of us, we do have our definitions for undesirable results. Sigma allowed us to recognize that an undesirable result does not necessarily happen with one well exceeding an MT for one time period. Rather, there's criteria that we put together to actually define when we thought that these adverse impacts that we had identified that we wanted to avoid, when we thought that they might occur, we put together conditions which are criteria for the triggering the undesirable result. And our criteria are 33% of our representative monitoring wells for each principal aquifer over 3 fall monitoring events, recognizing that we usually see our low water level in fall. For the interconnected surface water, we have a 50% of our representative monitoring wells. I know at the time people were concerned that 50% seems a little high. It's because we have so few monitoring wells along our river boundaries right now in our network. But again, we are working to improve that immediately, and I'll say something more about that a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so let's go around the basin for a little bit and just actually look at some example hydrographs and kind of see where we are with respect to the MTs and the interim milestones. This is a map that represents the wells in the western upper principal aquifer. These are in the western portion of the subbasin, and you'll see the red dotted line, which you've seen on many, many maps in the past. This is the approximate extent of the Corcoran clay in the subsurface. The western upper principal aquifer is above the Corcoran clay. So we are talking about the relative shallow, unconfined aquifer when we look at this map. We have a lot of color coding on this map. You can see from the legend what for yourself where everything is indicated, but essentially the sort of red coloring that you see are the wells that we have water levels below the minimum thresholds. So it gives you some kind of an idea about where we have declining water levels. About 44% of the representative monitoring wells in this principal aquifer have water levels that have fallen below the minimum threshold, about 9 wells above and 7 wells below. 2 wells actually don't have an MT yet because these are very newly installed Proposition 68 wells. We put them in areas of data gaps, so we didn't have a lot of historical water level data around that new well. And as a result, it was very difficult to come up with a defensible MT for that well. But we are monitoring it more often now, and we will be putting together, based on our maps for MTs in the past and our data from our other representative monitoring wells, we'll be putting together the sustainable management criteria for those wells also. Here's a hydrograph. The way that I've organized these, you'll see a little map on the right-hand lower portion of the slide with a red dot, and that red dot will be the hydrograph that you're looking at. We constructed hydrographs for all of our representative monitoring wells, and they all cover the same time period from 1990 to this spring monitoring event for 2022. So this first hydrograph, you can look at the dot on the very right-hand portion of that blue line on the hydrograph, and you can see that it is above the orange line, meaning that we have a spring 2020 water level above the MT. We do see a declining trend, however, in this well, especially recently, even after the water levels had recovered quite a bit from the 2012 to the 2016 drought. Here's a representative monitoring well that has a water level that has just barely fallen below, about 1 foot below the MT for the spring 2022 monitoring event. And again, a continuing declining trend in that well over the last couple of years. For the western lower principal aquifer, again, we're in the west, but now we are in the confined aquifer below the Corcoran clay. We have fewer wells here, and we have, because it is a confined aquifer, we do see a larger change in water level for the equivalent change in storage. And as a result of that, you'll get water level fluctuations that look a little more dramatic than they do in the upper unconfined aquifer. But for this particular principal aquifer, we do have 75% of our representative wells below our minimum thresholds. Only 1 well is above with 3 below. 1 was not measured. That's the Blum well that I had mentioned previously that we have access problems with USGS on, is the little green dot that you see along the southern southwestern boundary of the Subbasin. That's the Merced River. And we were trying to get that incorporated into our program because it provides us information right on the boundary of our subbasin. So it was an important component to incorporate, and we didn't want to ignore it, but we don't have it quite able to access it quite yet. And again, 3 wells were brand new, only had 1 water level measurement, I think, by the time that we filed the GSP, and we don't have MT set for those yet, but that work is in progress. Let's look at a couple of hydrographs for the lower aquifer then. You can see the red dot in the northeastern portion there. Again, you see the little bit of larger fluctuations over time in the confined aquifer, and spring 2022 water levels was above the MT in this well, so that was good. We have another well in the western lower principal aquifer that has a not only a declining trend, but probably influenced from pumping. And so one of the things that we are in the process of doing as rapidly as possible is moving away from using active production wells in our representative monitoring network, not necessarily this one, but other wells that are serving as irrigation wells as well. And because, we really want to be able to understand if water levels are declining in the aquifer rather than being affected in an inefficient well. So that's part of the reason for looking to make sure that we have more dedicated monitoring wells in our network than we do production wells. Moving to the eastern principal aquifer, we do have some declining water level trends throughout the eastern principal aquifer in the subbasin. about 60% of the representative monitoring wells were below the MT in spring 2020, 6 wells above, 9 wells below, and 1 had the casing collapse problem. And I'm not sure that if my cursor is easily seen, if you can see my purple cursor, it's circling the well with the collapsed casing. And we have an additional dot on the map that's labeled TSS. That stands for the Department of Water Resources Technical Support Services. We have a contract with the Department of Water Resources that when they have their rigs available, they're going to be going through the San Joaquin Valley and in the selected subbasins, actually drilling additional dedicated monitoring wells. This is a wonderful service, and we were very lucky to have gotten a few wells into that program. And the TSS well, as you can see, is in an area of the eastern portion of the Eastern Principal Aquifer where we have very little information. And so it's going to fill an important data gap area, as well as probably give us very similar information as the well with the collapsed casing. So perhaps that will turn out to be a good replacement well when we can get that well drilled. Looking at some hydrographs now for the Eastern Principal Aquifer. We have several wells in here where we don't have long-term data. That's okay. We have long-term data in other wells nearby where perhaps we couldn't access it for the monitoring network, but it gave us information on setting the MTs for some of these areas. And in this well, you can see that we've been measuring water levels since about October of 2020. The Eastern Turlock Subbasin GSA has done a fabulous job in putting in continuous monitoring transducers in many of their representative monitoring wells, and it provides a lot of fantastic information. And we're considering doing that for our new monitoring wells that we're planning to add in as well. An additional hydrograph that we have in the Eastern Principal Aquifer here in the northwestern portion is shown. Again, an area where there's been a lot of pumping in with drought conditions continuing. We have declining water levels in that area. We see that the spring 2020 event for this particular well is below the MT, but above the IM. If you can follow that on the hydrograph, below the orange line and above the navy dashed line. So you can see that because of those trends, it's really been below the MT since about June of 2020, but the spring measurement does show some recovery. And so we do see that the well has the ability to recover. And this is a good example of seeing how the transducer data is so helpful that you can get so much more detailed information with respect to seasonal fluctuations and trends of water levels in these wells when you have this kind of a monitoring device in the well. And then finally, an additional hydrograph for the Eastern Principal Aquifer, again, a declining water level trend with some fluctuations. And spring 2020 is below the MT, but certainly shows a large recovery from the previous fall event. So perhaps good information there. Moving to the interconnected surface water network that we have, you can see that now you're looking at wells that are close to the river boundaries, the Tuolumne on the north, the San Joaquin River on the west, and the Merced River on the south. For the San Joaquin River, we didn't have any exceedances in the 3 wells along that river for MTs. For the Tuolumne, 2 of the 3 did exceed the MTs, and those are the 2 that are in the eastern portion of the along the Tuolumne, and we'll take a look at a hydrograph there in just a minute. And then along the Merced, we also had 4 of the 5 below the MT. So we don't have very complete data, and we don't have ideal data for our interconnected surface water. So we're going to be working on that very diligently over the next year to get some of those data gaps filled. Let's take a look at a few of the hydrographs that we do have. For the San Joaquin River, you can see the well located where the red dot shows here. And we saw the water levels recover in spring in that well and are now above the MTs. For a well along the Tuolumne, you can see that declining water level trend that we've had for some time period. And again, some recovery indicated over the last couple of years. You can tell that this well actually dipped below the level of the interim milestone, but recall we hadn't even submitted our GSP at that point. So we weren't managing the basin yet, and we didn't have control over what was happening with respect to some of those declining trends at that time. But we'll be working in the coming years, getting everything together to make sure that we arrest those trends. And then one well that is down near the Merced River is shown on this last example hydrograph. You can see that the spring 2020 event is below the MT and above the IM, and showing a little bit of recovery there as well. So those are the results. And I thought I'd just take two last slides just to do a couple of things. First of all, let's put these results into perspective. The summary, I think we all can agree, is that water levels are below the MTs in more than half of the representative monitoring wells for the spring 2022 event. And they're continuing to decline, mostly in response to ongoing drought conditions and the low availability of surface water available for growers in the subbasin. However, we have to recognize this really is the first monitoring event since the GSP was submitted, and is certainly reflective of the water levels prior to the GSAs being able to begin to manage the subbasin. We all recognize that projects and management actions are going to need time to be implemented, but I can tell you that implementation process is moving forward. Undesirable results have not been triggered. We are going to be looking at fall events. So we will be looking very carefully at what's going on with respect to fall. I can tell you we can pretty much predict what we can see now. I do expect to see exceedances of the minimum threshold and perhaps a few more wells even exceeding their interim milestones in the fall event. That doesn't mean this can't turn around. It just simply means that that is the trends that we are on, and we are going to be working to reverse those trends and stabilize water levels in the subbasin. There's only one well that appears to be below the IM now. There are others within a few feet, so we will see what can be what the conditions will be occurring that we look at when we do our fall event. And this is an important point. The TAC planning group actually met this week to begin to put together an action plan to decide how best to respond when minimum thresholds are exceeded. Now, recognizing that this does not mean that undesirable results are triggered, but the TAC planning group looks at the MT exceedance even in one well as a little bit of an early warning system. And so rather than wait until undesirable results are triggered and then you really have to act quickly, the TAC planning group is moving in the direction of trying to come up with a procedure, a policy, an action plan, as it were, to lay out steps that the GSAs will take regarding exceedances of MTs. And again, they even met on Monday for a brainstorming session to decide how best to begin to put this plan together. So that's coming in the coming weeks on an approach to putting this plan together. And then finally, my last slide here, just simply number one recognizes, now that Elise is on the line, Elise recognizes the true value that DWR has provided to us with the Proposition 68 grant. Many of these wells were not in place prior to receiving that grant. So we have been able to really improve the monitoring network to date. We still have some work to do, but a big shout out to DWR for funding so many of these subbasins that really needed those resources to get this program going. With respect to what's going on now, the implementation support activity is well documented in our GSP. It's ISA 9.2. And in response to ISA 9.2, which calls for improvements to the monitoring program, the subbasin is looking at siting and designing monitoring wells, up to about 24 monitoring wells at 17 locations, and considering transducers for improved monitoring in those wells. The Modesto Subbasin has done something similar with their Proposition 68 grant, and the success of that, as well as the success of the monitoring program for the Eastern Turlock Subbasin GSA, also makes us realize the value of that kind of a program. Those wells will also be addressing key data gaps, especially along the rivers. We're working with our adjacent subbasins to see if we can twin wells on either sides of the river so that we can get improved monitoring across the river boundaries in the subsurface. And then we are also considering replacement of some of the active production wells that we had to make do with in the representative monitoring wells. They were excellent wells in that they had a wonderful history of water level data. So that was very helpful to us to pull those into the network, but recognizing that they are always going to be hampered by two things: one, access, and two, if we don't know when the pumps were turned off, then oftentimes we will be looking at lower water levels as a result of the well rather than what's going on in the aquifer. And we really need static water levels in these wells to be able to best understand how best to proceed and manage the subbasin. So that's an important item that we are considering for our monitoring well network improvements. There was a kickoff meeting already being scheduled to be held sometime in the next week or so with regards to putting this well program together. And the importance of putting it together now is because the Department of Water Resources is coming out with their SGM Round 2 GSP implementation grant applications. The program applications will probably be available fall 2022. We already know some of the funding that's associated with it. It will be competitive. In particular, the critically overdrafted basins also have the opportunity to come back on Round 2 and request additional funding for their GSP implementation. So we're not just competing with the high and medium priority basins. We also have some alternatives that we're competing with as well. So the numbers are growing, but there is good funding in the program, and we are hopeful that improvements to the monitoring network can get funded and get into the ground just as soon as possible, so we can have a much better understanding right from the get-go what our groundwater conditions are across the subbasin. The GSAs are also looking at projects to incorporate into that funding. They have completed now the draft programmatic EIR. Herb mentioned earlier that's out for public comment right now. And so that was a big step forward for the subbasin to get CEQA compliance in place so that the projects and management actions could move much more quickly going forward. So that's it for me and the summary of the spring 2020 monitoring event. And I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody might have about this or any of the GSP implementations.
Thank you, Phyllis. That was very very detailed and thorough, and I appreciate that. It's our first one, and we're moving into a new world here. There's always a little bit of mixed news, right? It's a difficult time, one of the worst driest periods in California history, and we're trying to implement a groundwater sustainability plan. But again, good information to help us as we move forward. Do you have questions for Phyllis at this time? Questions on the monitoring? See what to do as we move ahead. I don't see any hands raised. That was great, Phyllis. Thank you very much. So
thank you.
Concludes item number 7. And with that, we'll go to item number 8, the Department of Water Resources Sustainable Groundwater Management Program, the Round 2 Implementation Grant Application. So we have a proposal from Todd to prepare a Round 2 Implementation Grant Application on behalf of the West and East Turlock Subbasin GSAs for planning and implementation projects. And Debbie, you're going to help us with that, or is that going to be Phyllis?
Nope, that's me.
All right, over to you, Debbie.
Let me see if I can pull it up. just a second. Here. So hopefully, let's see, move to the first one, and it's not on the thingy, but let's see, I think that's it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so does that come across to everyone? Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank
Yep,
you.
that's great, Debbie.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. It automatically like gets rid of everyone, so I can't see anything other than what I think I'm seeing. So thanks for the thumbs up. As Phyllis mentioned, the Department of Water Resources will be initiating another grant funding cycle towards the end of this year. They expect, at least at this point, to release it sometime in October. It will be a competitive process. There is one application per subbasin. And as we understand, it'll be a minimum of $1 million to up to $20 million per basin. The application process is expected to be a very short timeline, only about 6 weeks. So we'll need to be prepared to apply for the grant prior to the solicitation release in October. So to move that along, I worked with Phyllis and Todd Groundwater to prepare a proposal to assist the GSAs with the application preparation and submittal process. Todd Groundwater has been really successful in working with us in the past to apply for grants. We've been 2 for 2 so far, so that's good news. And they helped us with the last 2 for a total of $2 million. They are also familiar with the GSP, as you know, and the Subbasin. And we just contracted with Todd Groundwater to do the location and the preliminary design work for those additional 24 wells that Phyllis was mentioning. All of that is being funded under the existing Prop 68 grant, with the concept that we can then have the wells located and preliminary design work done. So we'll be able to apply for grant funding to install those wells. We anticipate that the preparation process would be similar to what we've done in the past, where we would work together to identify projects. There'll be coordination between the technical advisory committee and the GSAs, and the consultant team will kind of gather any necessary information and supporting information, and hopefully some letters of support from the community to be able to be prepared to kind of incorporate all of that into the grant application when it becomes available. The estimated cost for the application process is just under $60,000, with an estimated start date mid to late August. So the GSAs, in preparation for this, budgeted for consulting services to assist with the process of the grant application. The proposal came in just slightly above what was budgeted. It's budgeted jointly, so the $3,200 that it's above the budget would be jointly shared between the 2 GSAs. This project would be on a time and materials basis, so it's possible that would come in a little under. You know, as you budget for this and as you estimate for this, we don't know exactly what the requirements are going to be for the grant application. So it could be a little less, we don't know. But the other thing is that there are other projects that are expected to be under budget and would compensate for the $3,200. The GSAs also budgeted this past year, because we didn't know if we would get grant amendment to do the well design work that we're doing now under the existing grant. So we did budget for some of that work, so some of those funds could cover the $3,200, because and also we have approval from DWR to do the final PEIR using the Prop 68 grant funding as well. And so some of those funds that were budgeted in this current fiscal cycle could be used for that. So I guess my message is that there, I think there's enough within the existing budget to cover the $3,200. So we would be looking to the technical advisory committees and then the GSAs to approve the process to move forward with contracting for this process. And so if the TACs recommend to move forward, then we would go to the West Turlock GSA. And I believe perhaps the East Turlock GSA and or technical advisory committee may have thought about this earlier as well. So I don't know where that is, and I would kind of defer to Sarah and Mike Tietze regarding that.
Sure, Mike, do you want to take it or do you want me to?
I just sent you a text asking the same thing. But, I apologize for not getting back to you earlier, Debbie. I was actually traveling back to my office. So we presented this at the board meeting earlier this morning, and we are good to go forward with one. It's not really a caveat, but it is something that we would like acknowledged, and that is that we don't yet know what the requirements are going to be in the PSP. As I understand it from the available information, it's expected to be identical or similar to the prior one, for which the 58,000 and change would be appropriate. But there's also a chance that it could be pared back, in which case we would expect to see some cost savings. So if that can be acknowledged in the proposal, or Sarah, I'm not sure what the form would be, if that could be like a supplemental letter from Todd, but one way or the other, we would like that caveat recognized.
And Debbie, I think you referenced it.
It is
in
a
your
time and
discussion.
Materials basis. Yes. Sorry, I didn't
Exactly.
step over you.
Yeah, no, that I was just going to say, I think you referenced it in the time and materials. And so I think we're good.
Okay. So that's what I had. Michael, did you want to?
Oh, again, thanks for the report, and thank you, Mike and Sarah, for following up with the East Turlock GSA. Obviously, once we know all the specific details, we can make that decision, but certainly always makes sense if there's money out there that we can bring back to our community. That's clearly the direction that our boards have given us over the years through this process. There's a new, newer requirement from the state. And so it'd be nice to get state funding to help us through implementation. So do you have any questions for Debbie or any clarifications? Doesn't sound like that. So with that, the West Turlock folks, we have an action item. It's a motion recommending the West Turlock Subbasin GSA enter into an agreement with Todd Groundwater Services relates to the preparation and submittal of the DWR SGM program Round 2 implementation grant application. Would anybody like to make that motion?
Hello, motion, Michael.
Thank you, Leandro. A motion from Leandro.
I'll second.
Second from Curtis and Hilmar. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. And I would just clarify, I mean, we did make this recommendation at the East Turlock TAC and then today at the board as well. I'm assuming you'd like us to do it again here at the joint meeting. Maybe Jennifer, you can just weigh in if that's something we need to do.
Thank you, Sarah. Will it be memorialized as part of the action from your meetings earlier today?
Definitely in the TAC minutes and in the board minutes. It wasn't an action, but it was a recommendation to move forward.
Okay, but it was an action, a recommended action as part of your TAC minutes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then I think that is sufficient as long as it includes the basis of the information that we have listed here. That we enter into an agreement with Todd Groundwater for services related to the preparation and submittal of the DWR SGM program round 2 grant implementation. Round 2 implementation grant application, then I think that would be sufficient. And I can just get a copy of that to have as part of the record.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I mean, we can do a motion, but I just figured how many times should we do it? And
we're really excited about it. Thank you for clarifying, Sarah.
No problem.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll know in today's minutes that you already took action on this and reference that. So I think that'll be it.
Perfect.
All
Thanks.
right. Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Debbie. So moving on to item number 9, Sigma-related updates. It's our normal list of updates about Sigma-related issue. No actions taken on these. So who's up first? Is it communication outreach? Looks like Herb, you're up first.
Yes, I just have 2 quick items. I pulled up the Turlock groundwater website here just to make note that we have now out for public comment the groundwater sustainability plan program environmental impact report that was put together, and we actually have a link here that I'm showing on the page that takes us to that page on the site. There it gives an overview. Talks a little bit about and obviously has access to the PEIR that can be downloaded. It's almost 1,000 pages, and I think it's some 40 megabytes, so it can be downloaded there. People can submit comments through this, or they can mail them at the address that's listed further down this page. And then we also have the notice of availability up there as well. And so comments are being accepted for 45 days. It was released yesterday. And so the last day to provide comment will be close of business on September 12th. And just encourage people to take a look at that, and we'll talk more about that, and we'll hear more about that in various meetings as we move forward. The last thing that I have here is just a note that the 5th task of our DWR facilitation support services hours or work that we received was extended through the remainder of this year through 2022. And that 5th task is Inter-Basin Coordination with adjacent subbasins. And that was going slower as some of the adjacent subbasins to the north, south, and east of the Turlock subbasin were wrapping up their 180 days of making changes to their GSPs after getting incomplete status notifications or determinations from the Department of Water Resources. And so we now have the time, and they have the time now that they've submitted those, resubmitted those to work with us on Inter-Basin Coordination. And so we're going to be starting that up in the next few weeks. And we're trying to get some initial meetings set up and have some virtual meetings for that. And so that is all I have for now, unless there's questions.
Do we have any questions for Herb? I know, Herb. Thanks for your thoroughness. Over to you, Debbie. Implementation and grants.
Thank you, Michael. So we've talked about some things, and so I'll try not to rehash all of that. But I did want to talk a little bit about the new monitoring wells that are being identified, the locations and the preliminary design work. We're just starting that process. We issued the contract earlier this week. And so we have a kickoff meeting starting next week. We're wanting to find locations that don't have wells adjacent to them, so we're going to be looking for locations that may work for that. And we'll likely be reaching out to the agencies there may be public lands that may be able to have a monitoring well on them to be able to meet those needs, particularly along the rivers. There may be some parks, there may be roadways, those types of things where we could install monitoring wells. And so be on the lookout for that. And we really appreciate the help in finding suitable sites to provide a robust monitoring network for this subbasin. And then also I wanted to let you know that we are moving forward with some of the other implementation support activities and developing scopes of work. They'll be coming to you in the coming months. All of those are identified in the GSP as things that we would do, and we budgeted for these projects. One is to do some work to update the groundwater model. As we were doing the annual report, we identified some land use things that we couldn't work through and a few other things. And so we're working on developing a scope of work for that. Then we'll be coming back to you folks with. And then Phyllis mentioned the work to identify what types of actions could be taken if exceedances of minimum thresholds could lead to undesirable results. So we're developing a scope of work for that. That's one of the implementation support activities. And then the last one is a drinking water mitigation program. And if, for example, a drinking water well were to be impacted, it's looking at what could be done related to that. And so we're going to be developing a scope of work for that as well. However, that'll come a little later. It's my understanding that the Department of Water Resources may be developing some sort of guidance on those types of things, because this is an issue in many subbasins. And so we're going to wait to see what that looks like before moving forward with looking at a scope of work for a project such as that. So I just want to give you a heads up that we are looking at other things, and we'll be coming to you folks as we know more.
Thanks, Debbie. This work never ends. It's not a bad thing, but it's good. There's plenty more coming. So I appreciate everybody's ongoing engagement and participation in the process as we move forward towards sustainability. Okay, that ends our formal Sigma related updates. Have anything informal anybody want to add? News, updates, information? Okay, hearing none. That brings us on to item number 10, next meeting. The next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 25th, 2022, and that will be via Zoom, as always. And with that, I take a motion for adjournment from the West Turlock Subbasin GSA.
So moved, Curtis.
A motion from Curtis, second
I'll
from
second.
From Leandro. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. West Turlock is adjourned at 3:03. Sarah?
Thank you. East Turlock, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll move. I'll
Oh,
second.
everyone jumped in. I think that was Matt with the first and Dennis with the second. They're okay. I'll take that and do a roll call. Or yeah, I'll do a roll call. Matt.
Yep.
Dennis.
Yes.
Christy.
Yes.
Adriel.
Yes.
And Sarah, yes. And we are adjourned at 3:03. Thank you all very much.
All right. Take care,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you.